Hello. There was a bit of a problem with the first half of the big picture from last seminar, and so I'm re-recording it from home, and I won't have the energy that I get from students, but at least you'll get a little bit of an idea of what I'm covering. So when we talked about answering the big question, what does it mean to be human? Last week, people came up with various good ideas, and somebody mentioned the orange, and I believe the orange made an appearance in the video. And so as I was putting together this slideshow and picture of the orange, I posed this question: what is this object? And asked people to think about it in their heads. And undoubtedly people said an orange, but it's not an orange, because this reminded me of a painting from Rene Magritte, and the French underneath, which I won't attempt to pronounce, says, "This is not a pipe." And it's not a pipe, it's a picture of a pipe. And so we have a picture of an orange. Well, the key thing about the orange is going back and looking at the origins, understanding the process that goes into analyzing any object, so that we can look at its appearance and study its appearance. But to get to the essence of the object, we need to look at its origins, what forces brought it into existence, what forces bring about qualitative transformations, and which forces take it out of existence. And so if we do this with the universe and ask, what is the origin of our universe, that before the Big Bang, there's a unified energy field. And if we think about this field as being infinite, and that it's energy, and it's unified energy, in that the three main sources of energy in our universe: a strong force that holds matter together, the weak force that will break it apart, the electromagnetic field that also influences how matter forms and how it stays in existence. And then the fourth force really doesn't come into existence until our universe comes into existence, and that's the gravitational field. And there's speculation about a fifth force, which really, I think, goes to the unified energy field, and that is dark energy, the energy that exists in our universe, and we're just beginning to, or they are just beginning to understand its essence. But if we think of this field as being in energy equilibrium, and within this field, the energy sometimes will manifest in quantum fluctuations. But if we think about this whole universe as being, that this is the essence of being, is this unified energy field. And then, as I mentioned, because of the quantum fluctuation, there's a change in the amount of energy at a particular point. And if that energy gets to be, that fluctuation gets to be a little more constant, so that more energy. And when we think about this energy field, because it's infinite, there's a huge amount of energy potential that then builds up, and there's a big spike of energy, and it becomes so hot that there has to be rapid expansion in order to cool it down. And this is called cosmetic inflation. And it's really quite incredible. In 1,000th of a thousandth of a second, the universe expands close to 50 billion light years in both directions. And that is to help cool down the heat and bring it back into thermal equilibrium, energy equilibrium. And that's something that governs the whole nature of our universe. And I call it our universe because there are multi-universes. So with the Big Bang, there's a beginning of our universe, and then there will be an ending as equilibrium is reached and the energy field goes to absolute zero and becomes part of the unified energy field, either through a black hole or some other mechanism that takes this universe out of existence. And this unified energy field surrounds our universe. Well, there are two main methodological approaches that we will be looking at this semester. And these are really fundamental to understanding Vygotsky's work, because a lot of the science is looking just at the manifestations of matter. And the other piece of that is looking at the process that brings those manifestations into existence. So with the orange, we have the forces that bring about the germination of the seed and its interrelationship with its physical context, and then with water and heat and sunlight, and that brings about the kinds of changes, the process that leads to the sapling and the tree, and the bud to the flower, and the ovary to the fruit, and then the decomposition of the orange. So everything in the universe has a beginning and an ending. That's a fundamental part of how our universe works. And if we don't look at the process and only look at the manifestations, we won't understand the essence of that which we're looking at. And there's a tremendous amount of science that has gone into the manifestations, which is extremely important. But you can't just add all those manifestations of an entity like an orange together and understand the process as a whole. In order to understand the process, you have to abstract from the physical world to understand how this abstract force is playing out. And that's where science has a problem, because process cannot be measured. Manifestation means phenomenon. Phenomenon is that which can be observed. We cannot observe the process as a whole and quantify it. And that gets left out of a lot of science. And that's a point that Marx and Vygotsky both pointed out. And so within the universe, within that process, there are natural forces. Those are the forces behind the energy, or within the energy, that brings the universe into existence. And then there's the manifestations in nature. And I put the brown in there to indicate that it's not just the green that we generally think of with nature and organic life, but it's also inorganic life. That is part of nature. So these two aspects of the natural forces that bring about manifestations of nature are important to understand. Now, the natural forces, we talked about the sources of energy, the electromagnetic force, the strong and weak nuclear force, and the gravity force, and then the dark energy. And electromagnetism governs how everything on the Earth operates, and it also gives an understanding of the creation of the atmosphere and the protection of living organisms on Earth from the ultraviolet radiation from the sun. And you get a picture of the relative strength of the different forces. The strong force, if we think about it as one, and we'll talk a little bit about the gluon, if it's one, the electromagnetic force is 10 to the minus 0, point and then 3 zeros, 1. The weak force is 10 to the minus 16, 16 zeros. And then the gravitational force you can see is 1 to, or 10 to the minus 41, which is 41 zeros, and then a 1. Or it could be 40 places, and the 1 is the 41st. So you can see how powerful that strong force is. And this, we talked about the unified electrical field, but that unified electrical field breaks down at the Big Bang. And at the Big Bang at the bottom, we can see how the quantum gravity wall comes into existence, and gravity as a force plays a role in the entire universe. At 10 minus 35, so 0.35 zeros, 1 seconds, the electroweak and the strong nuclear forces differentiate, and then the electroweak transition is electromagnetic, and the weak nuclear force is differentiating. And the one that we'll look at more, the QUARK-HADRON transition, is where protons and neutrons are formed. So you've got quarks. These are these particles, subatomic particles, and they are different in that there's an up quark and then a corresponding down quark. And so it's this unity of the down quark and the up quark, and they have different charges to them. And this is where we see the positive and negative in the unification of them. The unification takes place through another, what's called a hadron, and an example of that is a gluon, which is a particle that connects the electrical charges between the up quarks and then between the down quarks. This all is held together and forms a proton, and you can see the electrical swirling around. That then becomes the electron of the proton makes the nucleus of an atom, and then the electron spins around that and is held to the proton by the gravitational force and the electromagnetic force, and that then is the creation, the foundation, the building block of all matter in the universe. And this is another illustration of there's the cosmic inflation, and then there's this cooling that takes place over time, and that creates a cosmic microwave background, the CMB, which creates a signal, and those signals we are just being able to pick up today. So signals coming from the time of the Big Bang are being recorded. now, which gives us a tremendous insight into the origins and the development of the universe. And the quantum fluctuations inherent to space stretched across the universe during cosmic inflation gave rise to the density fluctuations imprinted in the cosmic microwave background, which in turn gave rise to the stars, galaxies, and other large-scale structures in the universe today. And one of the things that we've observed around these stars is these dust clouds. And as matter becomes more and more concentrated because of the gravity and the attraction of the core of this dust cloud, there's a tremendous amount of heat, which then brings about a nuclear fusion, and that's then the birth of a star. And the sun's nuclear fusion was about 5 billion years ago. With the dust cloud, there's then the accumulation and concentration of matter that then gets held together, and those then form the planets of the universe. And so this is the origin of the universe. And then the Earth goes from this molten mass to what exists today. And in the process of cooling, the atmosphere that we know today is created. And initially, the atmosphere had a lot of hydrogen and helium in them, which is something, those elements exist in the dark matter, the dark energy that's being discovered today. And it's those particles, elements that were part of this unified electrical field. And so those are part of those quantum fluctuations that barely come into existence. Well, when the creation of the universe, hydrogen and helium were predominant, and it is the same within our solar system. Now, helium and hydrogen are very light, and so they then escape from the atmosphere, which then sets up the second atmosphere, which was made up of a lot of H2O, which is steam coming through volcanoes or hydrothermal vents that we'll look at in a minute. A lot of the calcium oxide is absorbed and taken into the water where it joins with calcium and then creates a lot of the carbonated rock that exists as part of the Earth's mantle. And then the third element is ammonia. There's just yesterday or the day before, I was reading an article about how they have discovered these micro meteorites that are about the size of a human hair that came into the Earth 2-3 billion years ago. Then as they came in to the Earth's atmosphere, they were heated up, and in being heated up, were able to absorb elements of that atmosphere, which were then contained within those molecules that were captured in limestone. And they have found now these little micro meteorites in this limestone, and based on that can look at the atmosphere during the early days of the Earth. And then the final stage, the one we're in now, has the oxygen and the nitrogen, and then the ozone, which is that protective layer that is instrumental in keeping the ultraviolet light out of the Earth's atmosphere. And this then shows the changes that take place and create the conditions for the development of life. And this then shows this from the first bacteria, the cyanobacteria, through fish about 500 million years ago, and then amphibians, reptiles, mammals about 150, monkeys and higher apes are 55, and then the homininia, the Homo genus that many are extinct now. They're all extinct except the last one, Homo sapiens, about 200,000 years ago. And I posed the question to the seminar for them to think about what is the origin of the life and we broke into rooms and collaborated and came up with individual sentences and then group sentences answering this question and how we would go about studying it. And to look at the origin of life, we need to look at these hydrothermal vents that existed in early Earth, where the Earth was completely covered by the ocean, but the heat from the core, as a cooling process, began escaping through the Earth's mantle and the oceanic crust, and then burst through in these vents. But you can also see how seawater enters into the cracks, and then with that creates a tremendous amount of steam and black smoke. And there's an example of the hydrothermal vent captured today. They still exist. And microscopic organisms still exist around these hydrothermal vents. And to understand this, we need to look at things called monomer, which is a small molecule, and then the polymer is a combination of these monomers to create a chain. And you can see at the bottom an example of the monomer in the box that's part of this monomer. Well, the problem was in the ocean with that heat, a single monomer would break apart very rapidly. And what happened was that all around these hydrothermal vents, there are clay surfaces, and this is still the case today. And you can see on this clay that there's these little pockets, indentations. And what happened was in the seawater, these monomers would then end up in these little pockets, and because of the electrical connection, and the monomers would be joined together in a polymer, and those polymers, because of the strength of the bonding, were able to survive in the conditions that existed. Well, these monomers also included the amino acids, which were an important part of building the blocks that go into the monomers that create the proteins that exist, a whole variety of proteins. And there's 21 different amino acids that then form peptides, a combination, and they go into a protein chain. And you can see on the right an RNA in the nucleobasis, the four kinds of amino acids that have joined together, and those get arranged in this strand, in this polymer that's RNA. Well, just over 1 billion years, the combinations were such that it just struck on a combination that brought about self-replicating polymers, RNA polymers. And these self-replicating polymers, because they had the ability to self-replicate, became a lot more dominant in the waters in the ocean. And then there's within this water, there's also a fat cell, the lipids. And these are marked by having a hydrophobic tail that's antagonistic to water and a hydrophilic tail, which is okay with water. It likes water. And so these lipid cells form together into a phospholipid bilayer that you can see there. They then continue to accumulate together and form this structure that we can see here that allows proteins to penetrate, to go in and out. Because of gravity and the electrical chemical forces within lipids, they form a circle that captures water. And that then forms the initial cells. So this is the creation of internal and external. There's that membrane that marks where the internal organism begins and the external environment begins. And so these RNA polymers were just floating around in the water, and just by chance, they would get captured within the cell, so that when the lipids formed this sphere, the water inside would contain the RNA. And here you can see the structure of this cell, where we've got these monomeric units, and we've got made up of the nucleotides, the amino acids, and the cellulose, which provides the cell wall. And then you can see the plasma membrane, and how within the nucleus, this is a picture of our one-eyed Carrie, within the nucleus there, the development of the DNA and the chromosomes. What happens then, though, is that the volume of this cell increases by cubes, but the surface only by square. And so if you have a self-replicating molecule within the cell, then it will replicate, but then it needs the additional sustenance to maintain two RNA polymers. And the cell can't do that, and so the two RNA polymers move to the opposite ends of the cell, and there's then the narrowing in the middle, and then splitting into two cells. And right there, that key piece of reproduction, the ability to reproduce, is fundamental, which is fundamental to life, has its origins. And the eukaryotic cell came about 2 billion years after the first cyanobacteria cell, and it's marked by having this nucleus where there's the DNA, and you can see how complicated this cell is. Where it's receiving information from the environment, processing it, and then acting on it. And this shows you just what goes into going from the chromosome and the reproduction of the second RNA molecule. Now, within the genome of this is of a E. coli bacteria cell, the entire genome is reproduced in the creation of this second cell I mentioned. The problem is if one gene is damaged out of all of these genes depicted here, then the cell as a whole dies. But by chance, what happened was with the one particular cell would duplicate the genome, so one cell would contain two complete genomes. So if there was a faulty, mutated gene, there was still genes available for survival, but that mutated gene then began to build this process of evolution, genetic mutation evolution, where information's coming in gets processed differently, more efficiently to continue to survive in the environment. And then if you've got this one cell and you have genome duplication again, you're getting 4 cells, and you can see how then the diversity of life started with this evolution through genetic mutation. The eukaryotic cell broke into the protists, which are algae and amoeba, the fungus, the plants, and the animals. So it's a foundational building block. And it's interesting, there's a film that I just saw, The Fantastic Fungi, or Fungi, which if you have a chance to see it, you really should. And I played a clip, and you can access that clip just by Googling Fantastic Fungi. And the main character in there, Paul Stamets, said, we need to have a paradigm shift in our consciousness. If we don't get our act together and come in commonality and understanding with the organisms that sustain us today, not only will we destroy those organisms, but we will destroy ourselves. And it's I think, a very powerful message. We then paused the video, and this is where the problem came in. And this gives a little bit of a timeline so that we can look at this qualitative transformation, or what Vygotsky talks about as a dialectical leap, that took place about 70,000 years ago with the cognitive revolution. But he showed the importance of fire, which helped protect humans, but it also meant that it could break down protein so that the meat that was captured through cooking, would break it down so more energy could be absorbed, more protein could be absorbed through the body, which then went to providing the energy necessary to sustain not just a larger brain, but a brain with more neurons, because there's other animals that have larger brains than humans do, but they don't have the higher concentration of neurons. There's about 86 billion neurons in the human brain, and each neuron cell has dendrites that connect it with other cells. It could be one dendrite, or it could have as many as 10,000 dendrites. There are as many connections in the brain, in this neuronal network, than there are stars in the sky. So it's incredible the power that exists. And then tool making made a very big difference in the leading to the cognitive revolution, which takes place through language, as we'll discover in part 2 of this video. Making the tools also meant that it was possible to change nature, and in changing nature, humans changed humanity. And then it shows the agriculture up to the future, and this is something that we will get into, as I said, in part 2. So this is the question I posed. And so I will end the recording here, and you can pick it up in part 2. So thanks.